the rector and I were talking about how Ukraine is a young democracy, only 16 years. But let me talk to you a little bit about a young democracy. I'm going to talk to you briefly this morning about a country that is within 2 decades of its independence. I'm going to talk to you this morning a little bit about a country that is coming off of a world-famous revolution. A revolution that the whole world watched and applauded. I'm going to talk to you about a country that is picking its way. It's kind of feeling its way between two major world powers. I'm going to talk to you about a country that has recently elected its 3rd president. And in that election for the 3rd president of this young democracy was a controversy. It was an unusual election that didn't follow exactly the script of normal elections according to the constitution of that country. One candidate of this election for the 3rd president, this young democracy I'm talking about, was inclined towards one of those 2 global powers, world powers that I mentioned, and the other candidate for president in that presidential election was inclined towards the other of the global powers that they were picking their way between. This country, this young democracy that I'm talking about, is divided in many people's view into sections of the country. Geographical sections, but also political sections, that political divides between the 2 sides. And there are, in this young democracy, oligarchs that are associated with one or the other, actually associated with one of the regions of this young democracy. Now, what young democracy am I talking about here? That's the right answer. I would be talking about Ukraine. However, I could make the same statement, all of those statements that I just made, I could make the same statement about the United States in 1801. Let me just run through those statements again and think about how they apply to Ukraine, but let me tell you how they also apply to the United States. I mentioned that this young democracy was within 2 decades of its independence. Well, the United States didn't get its independence until 1781 or so. It started in 1776, and when it declared its independence, but then had to fight for it. So the United States was within a couple of decades of its independence, just like Ukraine was within 16 years of its independence. We went through a world-famous revolution. In our case, it was the American Revolution. In your case, it was the Orange Revolution. We were picking our way between 2 world powers. In our case, it was France and England. In your case, it's Russia and the West. But again, those similarities. And in 1800, the United States elected its 3rd president, just like in 2004, you elected your 3rd president. And in 1800, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were the 2 candidates for president of the United States. And Thomas Jefferson was more inclined toward France, and John Adams was more inclined towards England. So again, there were these parallels. I mentioned that the country was divided geographically and politically. In the United States, there were actually 3 divisions that we can see. In the United States, there were the New England states in the northern colonies. There were the Central Atlantic states, the Middle Atlantic states, and then there were Southern states. And in the Southern states were oligarchs. Now, in our case, these were large plantation owners. But we had, so you can see the parallels between the United States and Ukraine. I'm not making this point just to point out these parallels. I am making the point that the United States was a new democracy in 1801. Ukraine is a new democracy now. There are lessons to be learned, I think. I hope that Ukraine can learn from the mistakes that we made. We Americans we've had more time than, we independent Americans have had more time than independent Ukrainians to make mistakes. So we've made more mistakes than Ukrainians in this case. And we hope that you will be able to learn from our mistakes. We hope you'll be able to learn from our successes. We've done some things right, and we hope that we can help pass those on. We had to do some trials and errors. We made some mistakes and we learned from them. One mistake that we made that has application here in Ukraine, I believe, is that our first constitution in 1781 turned out not to work. It turned out that this constitution was too loose. Did not have an identifiable and strong enough central government. And so our first constitution failed, and we started over. And we got a second constitution in 1789. There are those in this country, maybe some even in this room, who would say that the current Ukrainian constitution has some amending that could be necessary. That there's some improvements to the Ukrainian constitution that would be of value. Our Supreme Court didn't start out to be a very strong democratic institution. Our Supreme Court began really as just a clause in this document called the Constitution of the United States. And it took our most distinguished Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, 35 years to establish the U.S. Supreme Court as a real, strong, respected institution of democracy. He had some conflicts. John Marshall, the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, had some conflicts with President Thomas Jefferson. He had conflicts with President Andrew Jackson. And he took some time and took some effort to establish our Supreme Court as a respected branch, a very respected branch of our government. So again, you can learn from our mistakes.